Welcome to our Shabbat gathering. We're just some friends that get together on Shabbat to see what the Father is doing in each of our lives. We've just spent 30 minutes talking about all that and how our parents are coming into view in our lives. But this week, the article was on Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets. And Marilyn, you said you had a question?
Yes, it's probably basic to a lot of people, but I do not understand at all about the feast. Why they were given, what was required, and why were they important, and what did they actually do? And was it like a week-long party? What took place on these feasts and all that?
Are you talking about all the feasts or just?
Yeah, any and all, because I've never studied the feast. I don't understand why they were given all that.
So along with that, and maybe just part of that is one thing that interests me was all these high holy days, and obviously has a representation of something like unleavened high holy day, unleavened bread, and the others. And because in the article it talk about, well, what we see a lot of times was made up. I guess there was a lot of room for like making up things to fit their culture, but in reality it was only specific ones. And if you could explain that more along with what Marilyn was saying, that would be helpful anyway. I know it's probably a lot to that, but
Yeah. Explain the universe. Well, this is a culture of people who came out of 400 years of slavery in Egypt. And we're talking about the most brutal, subjugating slavery that you can think of. And when they came out of Egypt in Exodus 12, it said that there was a large mixed multitude of people that came out with them. It says that there were 600,000 men, not counting the women and children, that Hebrew men that came out of Egypt. And then there was this mixed multitude that saw this path to freedom and said, I want some of that. And so they came out with them. That wasn't the Father's original intention. He was providing for his family, the Hebrews, and that extrication was primarily for their benefit. These others that came out just were kind of hangers on, if you will. And once they got outside of Egypt, apparently, the Father was just going to let them go. But Moses had a tender heart toward them, having been one of them, and persuaded the Father to, keep them in the mix. which was a problem because this mixed multitude of people, I mean, they came from every corner of the known world at the time, and with them they brought their own gods and their own way of worship and their own cultures, and it wasn't compatible with this Hebrew Elohim Yahweh. So those patriarchs prior to this that had known Yahweh, Noah and Abraham and others up to that point, they had come to know and understand the nature and essence of spirit, whose name is Yahweh. These Hebrews that had been there for 400 years, I mean, you have to kind of put that time frame in our own time frame. You know, it's only been what, 250 years since the United States became a nation. 200 years, a little over 200 years. And from the time of the founding fathers of the United States till today, I mean, there is so much discrepancy that goes on. I mean, we just lose stuff over that many years. So you compound that by doubling that number of years that the Hebrews were in Egypt. And even though they kept the oral customs, you know, they passed it down orally from generation to generation. And they did have scripture, the Tanakh. Many of them were just, you know, this being in the presence of the Holy One of Israel was a new experience for them. And so the Father laid out the 10 words, which is kind of the basic nature of spirit. But you can see how those 10 words, the earlier patriarchs knew and understood what was going on with his essence and kept them. Genesis 26:5, the father was telling Isaac that, you know, the reason that he chose Abraham was because he obeyed his voice and he kept his commandments, his statutes, his ordinances, and his laws. And this was 430 years before Sinai. So there was just a lot lost. So you have an education process that's going on with the Hebrew people, as well as this mixed multitude who don't know anything about anything. And so every time there was a wrinkle in the fabric, you know, the first thing that the Gentiles did was, you know, they wanted to build a golden calf, or they wanted to have an orgy, or something, you know, to placate the gods that they knew. And it was a committee of the 70 elders that came up with the 613 ordinances, which is where within those 613 ordinances is we find the feasts laid out and how they're to be managed and celebrated and so forth. And what these feasts were put in place for is primarily to remind the Hebrews and these others of the imminence of Yahweh. And it's also a looking forward to the rescue of this family out of this darkness and death that they had been conscribed to by the disobedience of Adam. And to put them back, to restore the kingdom of Yahweh as it was in the beginning, and put them back in a place where they could have a a gateway to enter into that. I know this isn't really getting down to the nitty gritty of your question, Marilyn, but that's primarily what the feasts were for, was to remind the Hebrews of the imminence and importance of Spirit of Yahweh. And if you look at all the feasts, with the exception of Teruah, is because it's the only feast that doesn't have a reason for existence. But all the others do. You have Matzot, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is to remind the Israelites of their deliverance from Egypt and from that slavery, so that they wouldn't forget. Apparently, that was a common theme among the Hebrews, is they forgot a lot, which leads to Kippur, which is atonement and is a representation of the atonement that the kinsman redeemer Yeshua was going to make for his family. And then you get into the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, and it is to solidify that the nation of Israel is the family of Yahweh, and they are of one house. They are, together, which was amplified at Shavuot, when the breath of life was breathed upon those willing to receive Yahweh for who he said he was, and then those that do, we become the temple of Yahweh. That habitation now resides within.
So if they forgot, then was it given, did Yahweh give that to them during those 40 years before they went, before they went to the new land? So when you say they forgot, I'm assuming they forgot during the 400 years. But so what was the process for that to happen when it started over again then?
It was a commonality among the Hebrews to forget. I mean, he's constantly telling them, remember the Sabbath, remember your rescue from Egypt, remember all of the provision that the Father gave to them in the wilderness, for manna, for water, just for water. If you extrapolate, there were 600,000 Hebrews, and if each one of those men had a wife and a sibling, well, now you're looking at almost 2 million people. And then you dial in the mixed multitude, and you've got well over 2 million people out there in the wilderness. You think of how many truckloads, not truckloads, train loads, what do they call it? Train cars.
Yep.
Cargo?
Yeah, the cars, train cars. Yeah.
Train cars. Just think of how many of those would have to be filled and on site every day to supply that kind of water to these people. And not to mention, the manna that provided everything that they needed to sustain their life. I ate some oatmeal every day for about 15 years because I was told it was good for me. And towards the end of that 15 years, it was something I just gutted out. I just did it because I was told it was good for me. But I didn't particularly care for it. And I was putting all kinds of things in it to try to, spice it up, make it palatable. So you can imagine what was going on with this manna, how many different ways they were having to, first of all, gather it, then prepare it, and consume it, and what they were having to do to make it different every day. It was an ordeal. And it was also, all of this was preparation for them entering into the land of Canaan. But that first generation had to die out so that the second generation could go into Canaan. And I mean, I've been over to Israel, and I can tell you that the distance between Sinai and Canaan, I mean, it's a good hike, but a fit person could hike it in 3 or 4 days. It's not that far. But yet it took them 40 years. So you're seeing the same signpost going by, on a regular basis. And that's what caused a lot of the grumbling that took place. And it was because of the complaining and grumbling that the father said that first generation would never see Canaan, would never see that promised land. So you've got a lot of different things in the mix being in turmoil with these people. And yet the father is showing up every day in spite of all of that, every day, and providing for them and caring for them. Their clothes never wore out. Their shoes never wore out. That's that's a pretty healthy dose of supernatural for me. Just all that stuff. And so the feasts were put in place primarily to educate the Hebrews about what is coming, the Father's always wanting them to look to the point of rescue, of out of this death and darkness that they had been conscribed to. And he always wanted them to see that he was working toward that end. However, within the 613 ordinances is about a third of those ordinances have to do with the behavior of the priesthood within the temple and the sacrifices and taking how they took care of everything, to make all of that happen. Well, we don't have a temple anymore. So there's no way that any of us can fulfill that third of the ordinances. And James says that if you break one of these ordinances, you're guilty of them all. So my question has been to people that want to follow those feasts as they're written, is if and everybody that I've talked to that has a touch to the spiritual doesn't have any problem with understanding that the reason that the temple's not there anymore is because we are now the temple. We comprise the temple of Yahweh. And my question to them is, if you can see how that third of the 613 has been elevated to a higher place in spirit, then why are we still trying to perform the other 2/3 of those ordinances as though they still require that level of attention? Yeshua said, I didn't come to abolish the Torah. And within the Torah, the 613, he said, I came to fulfill them. And the Greek word for fulfill is palero, which means to make complete. To fill to the brim. When I fill this glass to the brim with water, it means I can't put any more in it. It's complete, it's full. But we don't throw the glass away, because then we'd have no way to imbibe of the refreshment that it held. And so what we have to do, if we're going to understand the nature and essence of spirit, is to try to figure out what he meant by that. I didn't come to abolish any of the Torah. I came to fulfill it. And within that definition of fulfill, there's nothing in there that even hints of doing away with or ending or abolishing anything like that. So when we see the life of Yeshua, the only feast that he entertained was the feast of Pesach, or the Passover, as it's been renamed by Christianity. And the feast of Pesach was I hate to use the word foreshadowing because it's been so abused, but it was the place where the Father and Yeshua decided, this was going to take place, because he is that ultimate sacrifice. But he doesn't, you don't see him, building a hut in his backyard and abiding there for a week. You don't see him chasing unleavened bread out of his house. He had no house. He had no place to lay his head. I mean, he was present in a lot of these things, but he wasn't actively participating in them as we would think he would. So when we think about what it means to fulfill something, Yeshua became the fulfillment of everything in the Torah. He became the fulfillment of those feasts. It's why I say that I recognize each of the feasts, and I celebrate each one of them, but not in the ritualistic way that most are accustomed to. It's because I have become Pesach, because he is my salvation. I have become Kippur, because he is my atonement. I have become Sukkot. I don't go live in a hut in my backyard under the stars, because I am the habitation of spirit, and so forth. So once we begin to understand what it means to fulfill something, then we have to look at, okay, what is this? What does it mean to fulfill this? Now, within the 613 ordinances, you have rules that if your child curses his mother and father, he's to be immediately put to death. How is that fulfilled in our culture today? Because I mean, there's been lots of times I've wanted to shoot my children because they were just, cursing me, not cursing, some slanderous epitaph, but that word in Hebrew means to turn away from what has been taught them by their mother and father and completely disregarded. And what happens when a child does that, if the mother and father are in the light as Yeshua, and the child turns from that, they're walking into darkness. They're walking into death. Because again, we have to realign our thinking about what does death mean to Yahweh. And in Genesis, when Adam was in the garden, the father told him that he could eat the fruit of any of the trees in that garden except for one, the tree of the knowledge between what's good and what's evil. And he said, on the day you eat that fruit, you will die. Well, he ate the fruit. He and Chava ate the fruit, but they didn't die physically. In fact, Genesis 5 tells us he lived to be 930 years old. So we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean from Yahweh's perspective to die? And there's no scripture that tells us that man has a spirit intrinsic to himself. The only spirit there is Yahweh. There's one spirit, eternal spirit, the Tanakh says. And his name is Yahweh. And unless we're engaged with that spirit in some manner, we have no spirit. And as popular as that notion has become worldwide, it's just not true. The truth is that Adam received the spirit of life when the Father breathed that life into him. And the day that he ate of the fruit, what died within him was that shared spirit with Yahweh. And he was cast out of the garden to become like every other dead person in the world, except he was Yahweh's family. And, like a father with any son, I mean, I've got two sons and both of them do things I don't care for, but it doesn't mean I quit loving them, quit helping them. And the father's the same way to his family. And so he immediately began to engage with Adam and Chaya to help them. He killed some animals and made clothes out of their skins. But from that point on, until Yeshua, until the resurrection of Yeshua, every patriarch, everyone in the Tanakh that's mentioned that came into the presence of Yahweh, it was all external. That internal intimacy had been lost. And that was what conscribed them to the death and darkness that they lived in until someone rescued them from that. And that someone was Yeshua, who became the kinsman redeemer to the house of Israel.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
A few minutes ago, you said that Yeshua became the fulfillment of all of the feasts. I don't understand that at all. Because I still don't understand what takes place at a feast. Is it just like 3 days of eating everything you can and
It depends on the feast. During Kippur, I believe it's Kippur, you don't eat anything. You fast all day.
Okay, so define what feast means then. Because if you're not eating at a feast, in my culture, I think of a feast as, wow, like a banquet, all I can eat is till, I have to visit the Roman room, that kind of thing. So define what a feast looks like for me, please.
It's a celebration because Yahweh has said it's a celebration. Now, how that celebration takes place is depending on what that feast is set aside for. Again, like I said, with Kippur, it is for the Israelites to look within and to see how they have sinned against their brother and over the past year, and to seek forgiveness for that.
Is that self-examination?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
The feast of Sukkot is a week-long celebration, and you live in structures that are made of straw and branches and twigs and leaves, and you invite people to come into your structure, and you have a meal. You the feast you're talking about is gorging yourself, which is what's the word I'm looking for? It's a selfish thing, and all of these feasts are designed to get people out of themselves, and look to others, except for Kippur, which is a self-examination about how they've treated the other brethren. Shavuot is the celebration of the breath of life that was once again poured out upon all of these Hebrews who would accept Yahweh for who he said he was. and that came after the resurrection. The Feast of Pesach is a celebration of that resurrection. And from the time that Pesach is nestled right up against Matzot, which is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And in the same way that the resurrection celebrates the restoration of the kingdom and the freedom within the kingdom, right after that is Matzot, which is remembering their flight out of slavery, out of darkness from Egypt. And the reason that it has to do with unleavened bread is because it was so quick. They didn't have time to put yeast in their bread to let it rise. So they had to take it as it was, and they had no yeast out in the wilderness, and so they didn't. They weren't able to imbibe in that. And right after the first day of Matzot, you've got the feast of Reshit, which is my brain, the feast of the first fruit. And Yeshua was that first fruit. What am I missing? Teruah, Matzot, Shavuot. No, it's Pesach, Matzot, Shavuot, Teruah, Teruah, Kippur, and Tabernacles, Sukkot. So that's the order that they come in. The first three are in the spring, and the last three are in the fall. And that has to do with the harvest. Everything that they did back then was agriculturally based. And so that's why they're there. And Yeshua became every one of those feasts by his resurrection. He restored the kingdom back to the Israelites as it was in the beginning, gave them a clean bill of health.
I still feel really lost, and I feel very confused and very ignorant. And yeah, there's a lot to this.
Yes, ma'am, there is. And it's why I keep saying over and over again that if you're going to dig for truth, if you're really determined to find the truth of what these words mean, you're gonna have to take out your spiritual pick and shovel and go to work on these words to find out what they mean. Yes, Luz.
What confuses me, along with what Marilyn says, I'm with her on. I agree. I feel the same way she does. But what also confuses me is that I know that it says in scripture, Yeshua says, I'm not here to abolish, I'm here to fulfill. But then when we read in the Tanakh, we can't really pinpoint anything right now, but I've read in various places where it says, these things you shall do from generations to generations.
For every generation.
Right. And even stated, not in my words, but whatever the word that's used is for, forever, until, forever, is to be done. So that's also confusing for me.
Well, that's why when we embrace Yeshua, there's two protocols to entering the kingdom. First, you keep the 10 words of the Father, and the second is you embrace how those words are manifest in the life of Yeshua as your own. And as we embrace his life, he is the fulfillment of those feasts. And because he now lives within me, I am part of his body. Guess what? I too am the fulfillment of those feasts. So again, to find the answers to the questions that you guys are presenting here today, and they're valid questions. I'm not trying to naysay any of it. It's just that I can sit here all day and try to explain all of this, but until you get a revelation from the Father, from Spirit yourself, about the meaning of these feasts and how to appropriate them in your lives today, that confusion will never lift. That's why the first thing we need to do is to hear the voice of Yahweh. In Jeremiah 7:22, I believe, he said to the elders of Israel, he said, when I brought you out of Egypt, did I require of you sacrifices and burnt offerings? He said, no. All I said was, obey my voice, that it might go well with you. Yeshua said, my sheep hear my voice. They know me. In John 17:3, Yeshua said, this is eternal life. This is life eternal, to know the Father and the one whom he sent. He said to the Pharisees in John 5:38, 39, somewhere in there, he said, you search the scriptures because you think within them you find life. And it's they that bear witness of me. I am the life of the Father. When you see me, you've seen the nature and essence of the Father manifested right here before you. And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate what you just said. There is a lot to this, and me never really having been in a situation to learn about the feast, I feel like I've jumped into the deep end of the pool. And I don't know, I feel like I need to just go back to kindergarten here and start at a different place just for myself. That there's for me, there's just not enough basic information right now in my space, in my head. And I can't, there's just, I feel like I just need to go back to ground level, whatever you call it,
Zero.
ground zero, because I'm really ignorant about the complexity of this.
So
And
what I would encourage you to do is to get still before the Father, close your book, close the Bible, close the scriptures, just get still before the Father. Present what you've just said to me, to him, and ask him to show you what it is about these feasts that you need to know.
all right.
And I promise you, he will. If you stay quiet and listen long enough, he'll give you a guiding as to where to start looking.
Okay.
And it may not even be the scriptures. He may take you somewhere else, but he will eventually bring you back to the scriptures so that you can understand what these words are saying.
Right. All right. I can do that.
Is that fair enough?
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Huh. I appreciate you taking the weight off of me trying to explain all that.
Oh, you did good. I mean, that makes sense that, and I figured that was the case, that, you do something, obviously, Yahweh would only do something to help remember him. And for us to be, stay in that because of who we are, remind us of who we are. And otherwise, he's not going to do something, make us do something that doesn't mean anything. So it's really getting there and the different meanings of it, and that's way more than we understand right now. So
I would suggest, I have an article entitled The 613 Ordinances,
Mm-hmm.
and I would suggest you might read that to kind of springboard you off the.
we have to read all 613
13.
ordinances.
No, it's an oversight on how they came into being.
Oh, okay. Whew.
See, we have to remember there's only 10 words that ever came from spirit to men. 10. The rest came from a council of 70 elders, and they were addressing behaviors that were going on within the camp that caused, when they brought darkness into the camp through their behavior, caused pestilence and disease and earthquakes. The ground opened up and swallowed thousands of them in one fell swoop. And what they were remembering, that this mixed multitude didn't have any center about who Yahweh was. I mean, they had orgies going on and bestiality and child sacrifice. I mean, it was all kinds of stuff. And so what they were doing was addressing these behaviors. If you read that article, it will help you to understand where they came from and why.
All right, cool. That's good. All right, that's all I got.
Oh, come on.
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah. I understand it is not biblical. I understand also that this was something made up by the rabbinical family. The question, it's not so much of a question, but what is this? And I know it's spoken in the article, but what is this whole situation with the first sliver of the silver
The crescent moon.
crescent moon appearing and it being a new year?
Well, that's the falsehood of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh means head, Ha means the, and Shana means year. So it's Rosh Hashanah, translated from Hebrew, means head of the year. But the name Rosh Hashanah does not appear in Scripture. It's a complete imagining of the rabbis.
Right.
And I have a PDF article that further down in the article you can click on the link and it will explain how Yom Teruah was changed to Rosh Hashanah over the years. A lot of it had to do with Christianity's influence. Hebrew children saw the Christian children getting presents, and they came to their parents and said, "What about us?" You know, where does something like that happen in our culture? And so it was a pressure that, you know, came from bottom up to force the rabbis to make a change where, you know, not only were the Hebrew children getting a present one day out of the year, they got one every week. I mean, got a present every day of a whole week. You know, they outdid the Christian thing. But you have to look specifically. The scripture says that the first month of the year is Nisan, and that's in the same month where you have Pesach. Now, the first sliver of the crescent moon, when it's sighted, it puts it. Lunar months are not like solar months. It's not like our calendar that we have today, where everything's, you know, down to the very jot and tittle. Lunar months, you can have 29 days in a lunar month or 30 days. It floats. And the way that the month is calculated to start is when you first see that sliver of the new moon. And then that pegs the month so that whatever transpires within the month is linked to that very first sighting. So I got an email this morning from a guy, and he said, "What happens if you can't see it? What happens if you can't see the crescent new moon?" And I assume he was talking about, you know, it's overcast or something like that. Well, that's why you had watchmen on all these different towers all through the land of Israel, so that if there's a clearing, somebody's going to be able to spot that crescent. And then they blow the shofar, and it goes from, you know, one tower to the next until it reaches Jerusalem. And that's when they blow the towers, blow the shofar from the walls of the temple. It's a different culture.
Well, also you got to recognize when it was too. I mean, they didn't pick up their cell phone and tell you about it, so that's a form of communication. And it was a pretty good one, actually, you know, of letting you know. So got to find out somehow.
Yeah, it worked well. Those towers also were set in various places around the border, so that if Israel was always getting attacked by somebody, so that when, you know, an enemy clandestinely tried to slip over the border, the watchmen on the towers would see it, and they would blow the shofar for that too as well.
I'm looking at the article and I found this fascinating. You're referring to Joshua 6:5. Although this verse mentions the sound of the shofar, in fact, in this verse, the two instances of teruah do not refer to the shofar, but rather refers to the shouting of the Israelites, which was followed by the fall of the walls of Jericho. I think that's fair.
Yeah, that's where that word teruah in Hebrew you can see that.
Well, just the effect of the Teruah on the walls of Jericho. It's like their obedience, you know.
Well, it was not only their obedience, it was their, I hate to use the word faith because that's been so abused, that word, but it was their understanding that they were following the directions of Yahweh, and he never lies. And if he told them to do that, and they did it the way he said, that he would follow through. And it was Yahweh that caused the walls to fall. It wasn't the sound of the blast or the shofar or anything. It was just this relationship that these Hebrews had with the Father. And it was through their manifestation of what he told them to do. They were obedient to that, and he followed through.
Which reminds me of your article, To Believe, where you explain about Abraham. To hear is to do is to hear, right? Is that
Right.
I get that? So
Shema.
they were
The Hebrew word is Shema.
Shema. Okay. Yeah. So that, yeah, that's very interesting.
It really is. I mean, you know, when I went to Israel, I spent 6 years over there. And when I went, I was still a Christian, and I was expecting the Father to just open up all of these avenues of knowledge so that, you know, this is where it all began, right? And he did. But it was not any of the avenues I thought I'd be going down. He completely dissolved my understanding and Christian perspective of what all this stuff was. Put me in a bit of a depression there for a bit because, you know, I was saying, well, okay, well, why am I here? You know, and it was just that. It was to come like all the other patriarchs. It was to come to understand and manifest the nature and essence of spirit.
Well, so I've got to call my brother. I've got a meeting talking with him about some things. So
Sure.
we appreciate your again, we appreciate your wisdom. And
Well,
always,
it's not mine. Thank the Father, because I can barely remember my name anymore.
well, we appreciate you sharing God, Yahweh's wisdom.
Yes. We enjoy this time. Just
I do too. I do too. I'm glad you guys are here. I hope everything works out with your mother, like you want.
Well, we don't know at this point. we're yet. It's all again to find out what everything looks like in Florida where she's at. So we're yet to find that out. So that's the next step. So, but anyway, thank you.
nice seeing you both.
Yes, good seeing you.
Bye,
Bless you.
shalom.
Have a good
All right,
week.
all
God
right.
bless you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Oh, Yahweh bless you.
I say yeah. I'm on the fence with that one, so I just keep it where everybody uses
Oh.
and recognizes. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Yes. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye now.
Shabbat shalom.